Good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, Tavshin Pei 5785, the Tilson Mishpacha of Am Yisroel, for dedicating all the Shirma Drashos this year as a zechus for besuros, tovos for all of Am Yisroel. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for this morning, Boruch Meir Rena Dubin, in commemoration of the yarzheit of Boruch Meir's grandfather, Moshe Mendel Ben Zev, zichron livracha, we hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family in Nechama. And of course, as always, we dedicate our learning li'ilui in zechus of our precious hostages. May Boruch Meir Rena continue to bring them home b'shalom and b'karov, and in the success of our holy soldiers, may Baruch allow them to be successful b'chol ma'asei yedei. And also with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. A very interesting daf ahead of us. Some fascinating technicalities when it comes to the misos business. Remember again, yesterday we had the zechus to begin the new parak. And in the new parak, again, we had an interesting machlokes in the Mishnah about the severity of the Adam Misos, the four different types of death penalties in Beis Din. So we had machlokes in the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon. Tanakama holding that the order of severity from most severe to least severe is skila, streifa, hereg, chenek, and Rabbi Shimon holding that the order is streifa, skila, chenek, and hereg. So then the Gemara began a discussion regarding, in general, when the Gemara brings down an order, so how makbid, right? How meticulous is the Gemara with the particular order that's been espoused? So that's where we left off in the middle of yesterday. The Gemara says, Rav Huna, v'ida, lafuke mitzvahs chalitza. Right? Good. So four lines up from before it gets wide. So the Gemara says, lafuke mitzvahs chalitza. Now, again, interestingly enough, one of the areas where everyone agrees that the order is really not specific is in the area of chalitza. What happened with chalitza? Listen to this. This now is actually a fascinating Gemara. Mitzvahs chalitza. What is the order of chalitza? Now again, I should have given like a trigger warning. It's a little Yavamas over here, right? So for some of us that might be a little bit difficult. But again, the Gemara says as follows. What is the order of chalitza? Bahu v'yivim tofnei Beis Din. So what's the halacha? So again, remember, let's frame the case. Reuven is married to Rachel. Reuven dies without children. Reuven has a surviving brother, Shimon. Shimon has a mitzvah of yibum. Shimon doesn't want to do yibum. He does not want to marry his sister-in-law Rachel. So what happens? They come to Beis Din. Remember, we had this in the Gemara. So Beis Din gives Shimon proper eitzah for Shimon. In other words, for Shimon, should Shimon marry her, not marry her, right? So again, Beis Din says, should you do yibum, should you do chalitza? So Shneimar, v'karlo zikni ha'ir, v'dibro elov. V'hi omeres. So she says, Rachel says, me'in yivami, my brother-in-law Shimon does not want to marry me. Okay, first white line. He says, yeah, I don't want to marry her. Now, all of this would take place in Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, even if that, of course, was not their first tongue. Okay, so then Rachel, the sister-in-law, would go ahead. So the Gemara says, then, what would happen? So Rachel would come. I love you, I love. So the she would remove his shoe. The yarka b'fanav, and she would spit in front of him. Rok hanira l'dayanin, and it had to be enough spit, like saliva, that it was visible to the judges themselves. Amra, she would go in and she would say, Kacha ye'aseh li'ish. This is what shall be done to the man who does not want to go ahead and rebuild his brother's home. V'nikra shmo b'Yisrael, and then they would call the brother-in-law Beis Chalutz Hanal. Good. That's the order. That's the order of chalitza. Rabbi Yehuda, mitzvahs chalitza. So Rabbi Yehuda says like this. Now the proper sequence for chalitza is, or I should say, the proper components for chalitza are the following: are korah v'koreh. He reads something. She reads something. Cholatzes, she removes the shoe. Rokekes, she spits. V'korah, and she reads something else. Vavinaba. So the Gemara says, okay, Rabbi Yehuda, what exactly are you adding to the discussion over here? That's exactly what we just said. You just said what we just said, but you just said it in a shorter form. So what exactly are you contributing? My kamash malon, maslisin is exactly what the Mishnah just said. Ha kamash malon, mitzvah hachi. What Rabbi Yehuda is coming along and saying is as follows. That halacha l'maisa, the order that was just espoused here in the Mishnah, and the order that Rabbi Yehuda himself just went ahead and reviewed, that is the preferred order. That's the preferred order. However, the apich, let's say they reverse the order. Let's say they walk into Beis Din and the first thing she does is she removes the shoe. Right? Or the first thing she does is she spits. So she reverses the order. What's the halacha in that case? Less lanba. Don't worry about it. It's fine. So again, as much as there is an ideal order by chalitza, which we've just seen, halacha l'maisa, if the order is upended, the mitzvah of chalitza is still 100% legitimate. So I'll say, so again, just to understand why is this conversation over here? Because remember, what we're fixated on over here is that the Mishnah listed in order, and here in our Mishnah, the order is meaningful. The Gemara was suggesting that in general, whenever the Mishnah makes a list, lists are generally not meaningful. In other words, they're meaningful for the information contained, but lists don't necessarily create a defined order. For example, chalitza, where the Mishnah gives me a list of all the things that happen, but yet, again, not necessarily giving me a defined order or sequence in which those things actually have to happen. So Gemara says, that supports this, bein shehektim chalitza l'rekika, or rekika l'chalitza. Whether you went ahead and you took off the shoe first and then you spit, or you spit and then you took off the shoe, masha asa asui. What's done is done. What's done is done. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa. Again, here's a perfect example of where there is an order that is listed, but the order is non-sequence specific. In other words, if you end up doing something different, halacha l'maisa, you are fine. But let's say, for example, we'll give you other examples where let's say order is specific. What's an example where order is specific? Listen to this. This nine Kohen Gadol mishamish b'shorna kelim. A Kohen Gadol wears 8 different vestments. The hedyot barba, a regular Kohen only wears 4. What are the specific vests? What are the Kohanic clothing? Biksones. Ksones is a tunic, a coat. A tunic. B'michnasayim, pants. B'mitznefes, which is the hat. Avneit, a belt. So those are the 4 basic big day kahuna Kohanic clothing. Most of them in Kohen Gadol wears additional clothing. What else does Kohen Gadol wear? Choshen, a breastplate. Ephod, we translate it as like an apron. An apron, it was a garment that went underneath the choshen, that really tied in the back of the Kohen Gadol. So Rashi actually is interesting. Rashi in Parshas Shumar Tetzaveh, Rashi points out, he says, when he tries to comment on what the ephod was, he says, I'm not sure exactly what it looked like, but Rashi says, Libi Omerli, my heart tells me that it's like the apron-like garment that the French women wear by their clothing. So it's interesting also, I'm going to just tie it back. When, Rashi says, what does it mean to leave you overly? My heart says to me. This goes back to yesterday's daf, right? What are we learning yesterday's daf? You're like, I have no idea. Right? So yesterday's that I heard, Sod Hashem li'yireyav. Right, this concept of das Torah, that sometimes, again, people steeped in Torah have an understanding of different things. So Rashi says, and the Lashon, libi omerli, my heart tells me, your heart tells you, not your mind yet, because it's not an intellectual thing. It's a heart thing. In other words, that I'm steeped in Torah, so as such, I'm tuned in. My heart tells me that it's like the apron that the French women wear. Incredible. Okay, male, Sitz is the metal, is the gold plate that the Kohen Gadol wore against his forehead. There was a little bit of a space between his, where the mitznefes started, and on his forehead he wore this Sitz, which said Kodesh LaHashem. Good. So those are the four basic garments of regular Kohen. Additional 4, we'll call it accessories of a Kohen Gadol. The Gemara V'Tanya, we learned. This is interesting. How do you know that you have to put your pants on first? Right? Good klal for life, right? But in general, right? How do we know that you have to, that again, when the Kohen gets dressed, the first thing he puts on are the michnasayim. So the Gemara says, Shenemar u'michnas sebad yu'al bisaro. The pasuk says again, the michnas sebad, literally again, the pants made of linen shall be put on his flesh. The Gemara said, well, 1 second. If that's the case for Tana, my time actime liksones. So 1 second. If that's the case, then why does ksones come first in the pasuk? In other words, here's the interesting point. Right? The Gemara says we know that halacha l'maisa, you have to, Kohen has to put on The Kohen has to go ahead and put on. This is by Pashas Achrenos, right? By the Avodah of Yom Kippur. But the Gemara says over here, how do we know that you're supposed to go ahead and put on the pants first? Because umichnes seibad yu abisaro. What's the drush over here? Abisaro means the first thing that comes onto your flesh are the michnasayim, are the pants. So Gemara says, okay, I hear that. But if that's the case, why is ksones mentioned first in the pasuk? Because remember, the pasuk begins ksones bad kodesh yilbash umichnes seibad yu abisaro. So ksones, which is like the tunic, that's mentioned first in the pasuk, but yet you're darshaning that michnasayim are put on first. So I don't understand. If michnasayim have to be put on first, then what? What's the logical thing? Mention that first in the pasuk, but you're mentioning ksones first. So what's the pshat? The time of my time aktmi ksones. Very simple. I'm sorry. The time of my time aktmi ksones. So therefore, in when discussing the various clothing of the Kohen, why does the Tana mention ksones before michnasayim? It's very simple. Mishum da'akta mekra. Because again, ksones comes first in the pasuk. So the Tana is actually mirroring the order of the pasuk. So the pasuk talks about the ksones first. Therefore, the Tana speaks about the ksones first. Even though we know that the first thing the Kohen has to put on is the michnasayim. Ukra. My time aktime. So now we ask Gemara. So this is the question. So why does the pasuk put ksones first? Right? Why not put michnes seibad yu abisaro? Why not start with michnasayim and then go to ksones? That's a good kasha. To which the Gemara says mishum the mechasye kula gufa adifle or adifale. Because this is actually very beautiful. The michnasayim only cover the bottom part of your body. The ksones covers the entire part of your body. So therefore, a beged, a garment that covers the entirety of the body, has a greater chashivos than a beged that only covers part of the body, and therefore, its chashivos, it is mentioned first. So I will say, but yet, halacha l'maisa, and that is halacha l'maisa, the first thing the Kohen puts on in the morning has to be the michnasayim. And again, here, just to point out, here's another example of where the order is specific. Has to be michnasayim, and then afterwards the other vestments. But why is ksones mentioned first in the pasuk if michnasayim is first to be put on? Ultimately, again, because michnasayim only covers part of the body, ksones covers the entirety of the body. I'll just point out something interesting. If you think about this, also it's fascinating. There's tremendous Musar Haskell and everything. Sometimes in life, or maybe often in life, when we want to advance ourselves, you ever have that feeling where you feel like stuck a little bit, and you want to figure out how do you get yourself out of your current situation, whether it's from an emotional perspective or a spiritual perspective. And often there's this a little bit of this unknown about where should I start, what should I do with myself to move myself forward. So if you think about it, there's almost two different approaches to change. There's a michnasayim change and a ksones change. Michnasayim change means choose something small and localized. Right? In other words, don't necessarily start looking for something that is comprehensive. Maybe all I need to do in life is a little tweak, like michnasayim. It covers part of the body. So maybe it's just a little tweak here and a little tweak there, and just small adjustments or a small adjustment, singular, that can make all of the difference. But sometimes in life, a person wants a ksones change. What's a ksones? Ksones is something that covers the entire body. And sometimes to get myself out of where I am, the change has to be something much more comprehensive. Something that covers the body in its entirety. Something that really, again, not that I'm moving to the other side of the world, but something that goes ahead and really just changes. It's like a paradigm shift in my life. So which one is right? Should you do a michnasayim change or should you do a ksones change? And what's the answer? Yes, and this is interesting because the Torah gives incredible precedence to both. Because on one hand, the first thing mentioned in the pasuk is ksones. That's the first thing mentioned in the pasuk. Because sometimes in life you absolutely need that comprehensive paradigm shift in order to move yourself forward. So it's mentioned first in the pasuk. But yet again, practically, what does the Kohen start with first, very first every single morning? With the michnasayim, with the pants, the small localized change. So is it a paradigm shift, a comprehensive change, or a localized shift, a michnasayim change? They're both available to us, and depending where we're holding in life, really determines which type of garment change we need to effect. Tremendous yisod. The Gemara goes weiter. Skila Sreifa. All right, so here we go. So now remember again, the topic of the Mishnah was severity of Misos Bezin. I both say, now, I know some of you may be thinking to yourself, what an odd machlokes, right? Which death penalty is more chamer? Dead is dead, right? Dead is dead, so what does it matter? So of course, what matters, and we'll see this explicitly later on, towards the end of the daf, I don't necessarily mean towards the actual end of the daf, because right, but towards the end of our shir, I should have said it like that. Towards the end of our shir is, I'll tell you why it matters. It matters in the following case: a person commits two averos, liable to two different death penalties. The general halacha is when you kind of like kimle b'drabimine. We know we've seen that concept many times. You do two things. You have dual liability, one financial, one capital. So you get the capital liability, but it dispenses with the financial one. Same thing is in terms of death penalties. When you do two things and you incur two death penalties, you get the more severe of the death penalties. As such, figuring out which one is more severe is actually of practical consequence, not just academic. So that's the tension over here. Okay, so now we had our machlokes in our Mishnah. So once again, just to review our orders. Tanakama said severity is skila, streifa, hereg, chenek. Skila, streifa, hereg, chenek. Okay, stoning, burning. Again, we haven't seen what streifa is. Really, only misa that we've really gone through exhaustively is skila. The other three, we'll get there, but we haven't done it yet. It's burning, hereg, which is death by sword, bepashtos, beheading, and chenek, strangulation. That's the Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon disagrees on 2 points. Rabbi Shimon holds sreifa, skila. So he puts sreifa in front of skila, and he puts chenek, strangulation, in front of hereg. Okay, so 2-prong machlokas, Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon. Okay, here we go. So this Gemara will say, really, actually, the Gemara is going to flow pretty seamlessly. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, skila chamura b'sreifa. Skila is more chamer than sreifa. Now, why is skila more chamer than sreifa? The Gemara says, shekein nitna lemegadev u'lo kohavim. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, because who gets skila? Skila is given to the megadev. Megadev is one who blasphemes, who curses HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and oved avodah zarah. So we'll say, so these are considered to be major infractions because they are rebellions against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, one who goes ahead and curses Hashem, chas v'shalom, one who worships avodah zarah gets skila. So the fact that skila is given to these individuals for this type of averos indicates to us that skila is more chamer than sreifa, supporting obviously the position of Tanakama. My chumrah. What's the chumrah? In other words, why do you think that these averos are so severe? Shekein poshet yado beikar. Because again, the act of cursing God and worshiping avodah zarah are acts of direct rebellion against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So because of that gives them their severity. Adrava, I can see just the opposite. Sreifa chamura. Sreifa is going to be more chamura. Why? Shekein nitna lebas kohen shezinsa. Because again, interestingly enough, that halacha l'maisa about we're going to spend a lot of time on this case. Torah speaks about again if the daughter of a Kohen commits adultery, she is given the penalty of sreifa, which is interesting because generally, again, adultery is not punishable by sreifa. So we'll see she gets a special punishment of sreifa. So the fact that she's singled out, the fact that when a bas Kohen, daughter of a Kohen, commits adultery, again, we'll have to discuss, is this during Irisin, is this during Nisuin, we'll get into all of that, but the fact that she's singled out for a punishment of sreifa indicates to us that sreifa is more chamer. Or my chumrah, what's the chumrah over here? Shekin mechalalas asaviha. Because again, when a bas, daughter of a Kohen, goes ahead and commits adultery, not only is she committing a terrible avera herself, but she is what's the right word? Not maligning, but she is profaning, right? Profaning. By humiliating her father, right? The Kohen has an exalted status within Klal Yisrael. His child does something terrible that not only is a reflection on the child, but ultimately a reflection on the parents. Take a look at the last Rashi before we turn the page. Shekain. Michalalas as Havia, Kidika Amrit Lekaman, as we'll see later on. Shim hayu nogin bakodesh nogin bachol v'omer arush shezu yolad arush shezu gadol. So we're going to see that there's tremendous blowback on the Kohanic parents when their child does something like this. So the fact that she's singled out for sreifa would indicate to us that sreifa is more chama. Top of nun kasavi rabbanon. So the rabbanon on the other hand hold. So we'll say so now. Remember, so that is a proof to Rabbi Shimon. So what did the Rabbanon do with the fact that the daughter of a Kohen who committed adultery is singled out with sreifa? What do they do with that? Top of non, kasav Rabbanon, nesua yotzi l'sreifa v'lo arusa. So Rabbanon hold like this. They hold that it's only a Nesua, right? Only a Nesua who is subjected to Sreifa, and not an Arusa. Take a look at Rashi again. Nesua, Bas Kohen Yotza Mechlal Nesua, Bas Yisrael Mechenek L'Sreifa. Aval Arusa, the Gabi Bas Yisrael, Beskila, Lo Yotza, Bas Kohen Mechlal Arusa, Bas Yisrael. So interestingly enough, according to the Rabbanan, they hold that an Arusa Bas Kohen who commits adultery is the same thing as an Arusa Bas Yisrael, right? Both of them are going to be by Skila. The only difference is if in a Nesua Bas Kohen, a Bas Kohen who is in a Nesua commits adultery, so whereas normally the punishment for adultery would be chenek for a Bas Kohen who is married, who is in a Nesua, who commits adultery, the penalty is going to be Sreifa. Umida'afki Rachmana la'arusa b'skila, and now since the Torah singled out an Arusa Bas Kohen for Skila, Shmamina Skila Chamura. You see from here that Skila is more Chamer. Okay, Skila Chamura Misayif. Next, the Gemara goes on. Skila is more Chamer than Sayif. Remember again, Sayif is death by beheading with a sword. So the Gemara says, Shekain Nitna L'Megadef Ula Oved Avodas Kochavim. Because again, you see that Skila is a punishment given to someone who curses God and worships idolatry. Umay Chumra, what's unique about these two infractions? Kidam Rinan. That's what we said before. Shekain Poshet Yado Be'ikr. Because remember again, these Averos represent a direct rebellion against the Ribono Shalom. Adrabah, I can say just the opposite. Saif Chamer. Ultimately, again, beheading should be more Chamer. Why? Shekein nitan la'anshe nir hanidachas. Oh, interesting. Well, so what's an Ir Nidachas? Ir Nidachas is a city which has worshipped idolatry. The halach is the entire city is wiped out. And how is it wiped out? Ultimately, it was Saif, by sword. So you see from here, the fact that Saif is the punishment for Ir Nidachas would indicate to us that Saif is more Chamer. Umay Chumra. And ultimately, what's the Chumra of Ir Nidachas? Shekin Mamonan Avad. Because remember, said by Ir Nidachas, what do you destroy? What do you destroy by Ir Nidachas? Everything. Everything is destroyed. And therefore, Allah Chalamaysa, maybe that's the Chumra by Ir Nidachas, and therefore Saif should be the most Chamer. To which the Gemara says, Amrit Eza Koach Meruba. So tell me, which one is more severe? Koach Hamadiach or Koach Hanidach? What's more severe? The one who incites everyone to worship Avodah Zarah, or the one who goes ahead and worships Avodah Zarah himself? Who's worse? Havi Omer, Koach Hamadiach. I would say the inciter, right? The one who riles everyone up to worship Avodah Zarah. He's worse. And then, what do we learn? Tanya, Madichi Ir Nidachas B'skila. And again, the inciter, you're right. And Ir Nidachas itself is wiped out by Saif. But the inciters, the ringleaders, they are killed how? With Skila. So again, who's worth? The inciter or the incitee? And the answer is the inciter, of course. And yet he's punished by Skila. So you see from here that Skila is more Chamer. I will say also a tremendous Moshe Haskell. Remember, we have a general klal that says whatever is true by Ra, whatever is true in the negative, is always more true in the positive. So you see from here that one who incites others to do Avodah Zarah, one who says us to Avodah Zarah is clearly held with greater contempt and culpability than the ones who worship Avodah Zarah themselves, which makes sense. So I'll say that's true in the negative. Alachas kama v'kama, if a person encourages or quote unquote incites others to do good. Sometimes we'll say we forget that we have the incredible ability to go ahead and get other people excited about doing good. Each of us has the ability to be a ringleader in the positive. And when I push myself and I engage in dynamic, beautiful spiritual growth, others see that. And if I can onboard others, it's a tremendous, tremendous zechus. And if you see that the inciters of Avodah Zarah are held culpable, halachas kama v'kama, those who encourage their chaverim, their friends, to go ahead and do even better, regain even more schar than for the mitzvahs that they themselves perform. It's incredible. So Gemara goes weiter. Skila chamura mechanek. Skila is more chamer than chanek. Shekein nitan lemegadef ula ovei kochavim. Ula ovei avodas chavim. So again, skila is more chamer than chanek, because again, skila is given to those who worship Avodah Zarah, and ultimately again to those who curse HaKadosh Baruch Hu. My chumrah. What's the chumrah of megadef and ovei avodas kochavim? Kedamra. That's what we said before. Shekein poshet yado be'ikr. Because the act of cursing God and the act of worshiping Avodah Zarah represents a direct rebellion against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Adrabah. I can say just the opposite. Chenek chamer. Strangulation should be more chamer. Why? Shekein nitan lemake aviv v'imo. Wow. Let's say if a person hits his parents, hits his father or his mother, the penalty for hitting your parents is chenek, is strangulation. So maybe you see from here that chenek is more chamer than skila. Umay chumra. Again, so I don't understand, what's the chumra in hitting your parents? In other words, what's the severity of that act? Shekein hukash kvodon l'chvod hamakom. It's profound. Because the kavod I give to my parents is compared to the kavod I give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Ishimov, right? Ishimov aviv tiro, v'esalkut shor. So again, the Torah equates the kavod to parents, ultimately again to the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, again, perhaps you see, and therefore the halacha is that if you hit your parents, you get chenek. So maybe chenek is most severe. Maybe chenek is most severe. To which the Gemara says, Rashi says over here, good, fine. Says, so the Gemara says, Midafki Rachmana la'arusa bas Yisrael mechlal nesua. So listen to this. So now, since the Gemara says as follows, Midafki Rachmana la'arusa bas Yisrael mechlal nesua bas Yisrael. So the fact that the Torah has distinguished between an arusa bas Yisrael who commits adultery from an nesua bas Yisrael, from chenek l'skila, and moves her from chenek to skila. In other words, the fact that an arusa who commits adultery gets a different penalty than an asua who commits adultery, and we move it from chenek to skila, right? So again, shma mina skila chamura. Essentially, what the Gemara says is like this: the fact that there's a deviation in punishment from an arusa to an asua, right? General adultery is punishable by chenek, but yet an arusa who commits adultery is going to get skila. The fact that there's deviation would lend us to imagine that skila is going to be more chamer. Okay, streifa chamura misayif. Streifa is more chamer than sayif. Burning, which we're going to say, doesn't actually mean burning someone. It's actually molten lead that's poured down the throat of the individual, which we'll talk about. Streifa is more chamer than sayif, than death by sword. Why? Shekeinitain lebas koin shezinsa. Because we'll say halacha l'maisa. If the daughter of a Kohen commits adultery, she is judged with sreifa. So Gemara says, "Umay chumra." What's the severity of her act? Shekin mechaleles es aviha, because she profanes her father, right? She demeans her father through her negative behavior. Adarabba, I could say just the opposite. Sayif chamer. No, sayif should be more chamer. Why? Shekin nitin la'anshe ir hanidachas. Because again, the people of the Ir Nidachas, as we just mentioned before, are wiped out by Saif. My chumrah. What's the chumrah of Ir Nidachas? Shekein mamon avad. Because when you destroy Ir Nidachas, you destroy everything. Ne'emar, so the Gemara says, Ne'emar aviyah b'skila, v'ne'emar aviyah b'sreifa. So the pasuk used lashon of aviyah by skila. This is talking about, again, the daughter of the Kohen, who goes ahead and commits adultery. So it says aviyah by skila, it says aviyah by sreifa. Ma aviyah ha'amar b'skila, skila chamura misayif. So just like again, when it says aviyah by skila, skila is more chayiv than sayif. Af aviyah ha'amar b'sreifa, sreifa chamura misayif. So to the aviyah that it says by sreifa indicates thus that sreifa is more chamer than sayif. Okay. When it says sreifa chamura mechanek, so sreifa is going to be more chamer than chenek. Shekei nitna lebas koyin shezinsa, because what says we just said before, sreifa is given to bas koyin who goes ahead and commits adultery. So again, the fact that she's singled out for this punishment indicates to us that it is more chamer. Umay chumra, what is the chumra? In other words, what is the severity of a bas kohen who commits adultery? Kida amra, that's as we said before, because she embarrasses, humiliates, and profanes her father. Adrabah, because it's just the opposite. Chenek chamer, strangulation should be even more. Why? Shekei nitain lemakya aviv imo, because again, chenek is the punishment for hating your parents. Umay chumra, what's the severity of the act of striking one's parents? Shekein hukash kvodan lekavod hamakom, because ultimately, again, the kavod to parents is compared to the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To which the Gemara says, "Min da'afki rachmana l'nesua bas kohen michlal nesua bas Yisrael." This goes back to what we said before. The fact that a nesua, right, a bas kohen who is fully married, right, commits adultery, gets a different punishment than a regular married woman who commits adultery, and it changes her from chenek to sreifa. Right, normally the punishment for adultery is chenek, but yet if a bas kohen nesua goes ahead and commits adultery, she gets sreifa. So what does that show you? Shma mina sreifa chamura. That shows you that sreifa is more chamer ultimately again than chenek. Okay, sayif chamer mechenek. Sayif is more chamer than chenek. So the Gemara says shekein nitan la'anshe ir hanidachas. Because once again, people of ir hanidachas are killed by sayif. Adrabah, chenek chamer. Chenek should be more chamer. Why? Shekein nitan l'makya aviv imo. because that's what you get for striking your parents. Says the Gemara, my chumrah. Once again, what's the severity of striking parents? Shekin hukash. Because remember again, the covet of parents is compared to the covet of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Afilu hachi poshet yado beikar adif. Nevertheless, the Gemara says, we consider it to be the supreme infraction. Supreme infraction is a rebellion directly against the authority of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what are those averos? That's megadef, cursing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and oved avodah zarah. Those are considered to be like the supreme averos. And the fact that those supreme averos are punishable by what? By skila, indicates to us that skila sits at the top of the Misas Beis Din pyramid. Okay, Rabbi Shimon says so. Remember again, that fine, that was Tanakama. Now Rabbi Shimon comes along, Rabbi Shimon upends the Rabbi Shimon says, number one, streifa is more chamer than skila. And number two, chanek is more chamer than herek. So in Rabbi Shimon's model, it's streifa, skila, chanek, herek. Says the Gemara, Sreifa Chamor Miskila. So Rabbi Shimon says Sreifa is more Chamor than Skila. Why? She came nitna lebas kohen shezinsa, because this is the punishment for the daughter of a kohen who commits adultery. The Gemara says, "My chumrah. What's the chumrah? Why? What's the severity of this act of a bas kohen who commits adultery? She came michaleles as aviha. She's profaning and demeaning and denigrating her father. Adrabah, say end of the first wide line. Adrabah, Skila Chamura. I say the Skila is more Chamor. Why? Second wide line. She came nitna lemegade for the ovid. Because again, that is the punishment for one who curses Hashem or worships idolatry. Umay chumra, what's the severity of the act of Megadeh for Ovid Avodah Zarah? Very simple. Poshet shekin poshet yado beikar. So the Gemara says, how does Rabbi Shimon answer? Rabbi Shimon tamei. Rabbi Shimon goes according to his reason. What does Rabbi Shimon say? Da'amar achas arusa va'achas nasua yosei l'sreifa. Rabbi Shimon holds like this, that in general, by adultery, whether a woman is an arusa or a nesua, halacha l'maisa, the act of adultery is punishable by sreifa. But the fact that the Torah goes ahead and singles out a bas kohen who's an arusa, right, who commits adultery, michlal arusa bas Yisrael meskila l'sreifa, and singles her out from, or distinguishes her from a regular arusa bas Yisrael, and switches her punishment from skila to sreifa, shma mina sreifa chamura. Okay, that Rose says that's Rabbi Shimon's model. Rabbi Shimon's entire thesis kind of rests on arusa bas kohen who commits adultery. She is singled out from any other construct of adultery, and ultimately, again, the punishment that she is given is sreifa. Is sreifa. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon says, you see from here, that sreifa is l'charabaza, but I just want to point out, it's interesting, in Rabbi Shimon's model, why is it that an arusa bas kohen would be singled out for the worst punishment? So it's interesting, if you think about it, there's two things happening over here. Someone, she's a bas kohen. She's bas kohen. So Kohanim are held to a higher standard. And the children of Kohanim are held to a higher standard. What's interesting is, it seems to according to Rabbi Shimon, we'll get into this a little bit more tomorrow and the next day, which is, it almost appears that adultery by an arusa is even more severe than an adultery by an asua. Right? What's the logic? There's almost like a heightened immorality. Because an arusa she hasn't lived with her husband, which means she has not had an intimate life yet. So this idea that a woman who has not yet experienced intimacy with her husband is already out and about, committing adultery, almost seems to compound the severity of the act. Again, we'll see it more because it's interesting, because Rabbi Shimon's model is arusa bas kohen is the most severe punishment. And the punishment that she's getting ultimately, again, is going to be streifa. Okay, and therefore, that puts Rabbi Shimon streifa on the top of the pyramid. Streifa chamura mechanek. Streifa is more chamur than chanek. Why? Shekin nitna lebas kohen shezinsa. Because it's given to a bas kohen who goes in and committed adultery. My chumrah, what's the chumrah? Kedaminon. That's because she humiliated her father. And Rabba, chenek chamar. I'll say the chenek is chamar. Why? Shekin nitna lemaka aviv imo. Because chenek is what you get for striking your parents. Or my chumrah, shekin hukash kvodam lehukash hamakom. Because again, the covenant of parents is compared ultimately to the covenant of parents is compared to the covenant of Baruch Hu. So the fact that the Torah removed an asua bas kohen from general Mesua bas Yisrael, right? Generally, the punishment for adultery is chanek, but yet an asua bas Yisrael, Mesua bas kohen gets streifa. Shmamina streifa chamura. Good. Streifa chamura misayif. Ultimately, again, Sreifa is more chamer than Saif. Where do we know? The Shekin Nitna Labas Koin Shezinsa, because it is the punishment for a Bas Koin who commits adultery. Umay Chumra, Kidam, what's the severity of the act of a Bas Koin who commits adultery? Kidamran, that's what we said before, that Halacha Lamaisa, she profanes her father. Adarabba, Saif Chamer, Saif is more Chamer, why? Shekin Nitan La'anshe Irhani Dachas. Because ultimately, again, Irhani Dachas is wiped out with Saif. Umay Chumra, what's the Chumra? Shekin Mamonam Avad, because ultimately, again, all their property is destroyed. As the Gemara says, Amrit, V'chi Eiza Koach Meruba. What is worse? What is worse? Koach Hamadiach or Koach Hanidach? What's worse? The one who is the inciter or the incitees? Amud Beis, Havi Omer, Koach Hamadiach. I would say, obviously, it is the inciter. Right, the one who incites others to sin is obviously worse than the one who commits the avera himself. The Gemara says, "V'kal v'chomer umach." The Gemara says, "V'kal v'chomer umach chenek shechamer misayif sreifa chamura mimenu seif chenek, which is more chamer than sayif. Sreifa is more chamer than it. Therefore, again, sayif hakal v'kol shekein, all the more so by sayif. Okay, skila chamura michenek. Skila is more chamer than chenek. Why? Because it is the punishment for the megadef and for one who goes ahead and worships idolatry. Umay chumra. What's the chumra? What's the chumra? Kidam Minan. That's what we said before, because shekin poshet yado beikar. Because halacha l'maisa, such a person is actively rebelling against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Adrabah, I can say just the opposite. Chenek chamar. Right, strangulation is even worse. Why? Shekin nitar l'makeh avavimo, because that's the punishment given to striking parents. Umay chumra. What's the chumra involved with striking parents? And like we said before, shekin hukash kvodam l'chavod ha'makom. The kavod of parents is compared ultimately to the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To which the Gemara says, "Mida'afki rachmana la'arusa bas Yisrael mechlal nesua bas Yisrael." Once again, since the Torah excluded an arusa bas Yisrael from nesua bas Yisrael, right? There's a different punishment for arusa and nesua. Mechenek l'skila, from chenek to skila. Shmamina skila chabura. You see from here that skila is more chamer than chenek. Okay, skila chamura misayif. Skila is more chamer than sayif. Shekein nitna lemegadef, because again, one who curses HaKadosh Baruch Hu and one who worships of all the Zara gets punished by skila. Adrabah, because it's just the opposite. Sayif chamer. Sayif is more chamer. Why? Shekein nitna la'anshe irani dachas. Because again, remember, Saif is the punishment for the people of the Ir Nidachas. Umay chumra. What is the chumra of Ir Nidachas? Shekin mamonam avad. Because by Ir Nidachas, everything is wiped out, even the property. 1 second. But I will say, which one is more severe? Was a lot of the same conversations. Hamadiach or koach hanidach? Who's more severe? The inciter or the incitee? Right? Who's more severe? The one who incites everyone to worship Avodah Zarah, or the ones who actually worship? Havi Omer, Koach HaMadiach. It's obviously the inciter. And I will say again, and what punishment does the inciter get? What does he get? He gets skila. So whereas Ir Nidachas is wiped out with Saif, the inciter himself gets skila. Now what do you see from here? V'kavach Omer, Umach Chenek shechamer misayif skila chamura mimenu. So if Chenek, which is more chamer than Saif, but yet skila is more chamer than chenek, sayif hakal kol shekin. Certainly skila is going to be more chamer than sayif. Okay. The Gemara says chenek chamer misayif. Chenek is more chamer than sayif. Gemara says shekin nita memaki avaviimo. Because ultimately, again, chenek is what you get, chas v'shalom, for striking your parents. Ayumay chumra. What's the severity of the act of striking your parents? Kida amra. That's what we just said before. That Allah Chalamayim said the kavod due to parents is like the kavod due to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Adrabah. It's just the opposite. Sayif chamer. Sayif is more chamer. Why? Shkei nita la'anshi Ir Nidachas. Because again, remember, sayif is the punishment for the people of the Ir Nidachas. Says Gemara, my chumra. What's the chumra? Shekin mamonam avad. Ultimately, again, because remember, by Ir Nidachas, all of the property is wiped out. But still, which one is more severe? Koach hamadiach or koach hanidach? Is it ultimately, again, the inciter or the incitees? So the Gemara says, koach hanidach. I'm sorry, Havi Omer koach hamadiach. It's obviously the inciter. The Gemara says, Havi Omer koach hamadiach. V'tanya, madichi Ir Nidachas b'skila b'shon or b'chanek. And I will say, we see over here that halacha l'maisa, the inciter, is with skila, and everyone else ultimately, again, Everyone else is going to be with Saif. Incredible, right? Rabbi Shimon says, by Chenek. Good. So now we've just established the two models. The model of the Tanakama and the model of Rabbi Shimon, each really laying out their respective arguments. So the Gemara goes back to a little bit. Margala b'pumet Rabbi Yochanan. So we'll say there was Margala b'pumet Rabbi Yochanan means that there was something that Rabbi Yochanan was accustomed to. It literally means there was a jewel in the mouth of Rabbi Yochanan, which Bepashtos means that there was something he used to say frequently. What would he say? Nara murasa bas kohen shezin sabeskila. So let's listen to this. If you have a Nara murasa, but this is a girl who had Erison, who is a bas kohen. So okay, let's just say it differently. A bas kohen who is an arusa, who goes ahead and commits adultery. What's talacha? The skila. She gets skila. Rabbi Shimon says the streifa. Rabbi Shimon disagrees and he says streifa. And I will say, just want to point out, this very much is at the root of our machlokes of the Mishnah, right? Remember again, like I said before, everyone is going to agree that interestingly enough, a bas kohen arusa who commits adultery is deserving of the most severe death penalty. Why? Again, we'll discuss. But she is. So again, Tanakam Rabbanan say skila. Rabbi Shimon says sreifa. I'm sure it's sreifa. Now, zin samei aviha. Interestingly enough, what happens if halacha l'maisa, the person she commits adultery with is her father? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon Omer zin samei aviha b'skila, Rabbi Shimon Omer b'sreifa. If she committed adultery with her father, ultimately again, then it's b'skila. Rabbi Shimon says sreifa. So the Gemara says, "My kamash malon the Rabbana." So again, what exactly are the Rabbana coming to teach us? That nisua yatsa l'sreifa v'lo arusa. According to the Rabbanon, it's only a bas kohen nisua who gets straight. Remember, on both sides, normally the punishment for adultery is chenek. A bas kohen is going to be treated differently. Bas kohen is that halacha l'maisa. She's going to go ahead and get. It's only nisua who gets streifa and not an arusa. Right? The arusa will get skila. The Rabbi Shimon, achas arusa v'achas nesua yatzul l'sreifa. According to Rabbi Shimon, a bas kohen is dealt with stringently across the board. Whether it's irisin or nisuin, she's going to get streifa. But taimamai, what's the reason for this? Mishum l'rabbanan skila chamura or Rabbi Shimon streifa chamura. Again, I will say it's very simple. Remember, everyone is agreeing that a bas kohen is going to go ahead, who is mizana, who commits adultery, is going to get the most severe penalty. Now again, whether that's a bas kohen arusa and nisua, or just an arusa, that's a machlokes also. But the machlokes is most severe penalty. According to the Rabbanan, that is going to be skila. According to Rabbi Shimon, ultimately, again, that is going to be streifa. And I will say, a lot of this also is obviously the discussion about how they're going to go ahead and interpret the psukim. I just want to point out over here, Rabosai, that there are two psukim. One pasuk says, "Ubas ish kohen ki seicha liznos." If the daughter of a kohen will commit adultery, esavia hi mechaleles, she profanes her father. Ba'esh tisaref, sreifa. There's another pasuk. V'otzias hanara pesach beisavia uskalua anshe ira ba'avanim umesa. Another pasuk of a bas kohen who commits adultery, and it's skila. It's skila. So now, so again, the shaila is going to be how each is interpreting the pasuk to refer to which thing. But the point over here, for our purposes over here, is the bas kohen who is mizana is going to get the most severe punishment. According to the Rabbanon, that's going to be skila. According to Rabbi Shimon, it's going to be streifa. So Gemara says, it's interesting. At the end of this whole discussion, the Gemara says, nafka mina lami. Nafka mina lami. So at the end of the day, ultimately, again, who cares? Like, dead is dead, as we just said before. No, it matters, as we just said before. The Mishnah is chayiv, shtei misos bezdin, nidona b'chamura. So again, it would have been nice to have that line at the beginning of the Gemara, right? But Lamais, again, the Gemara says, so like, why are we doing all this, right? Why trying to figure out which is the more severe death penalty? You know, it matters because if someone did two acts, which are both liable to two different death penalties, we give them the more severe of the two. So knowing which is more severe is of absolute importance. The Gemara goes right there. Good. I just want to point out something so interesting. If you think about it, the lashon of margala bepume Rabbi Yochanan. Now, normally when you see that expression, what usually follows it? Some like beautiful expression. right? Rabbi Yochanan had this jewel in his mouth, right? This thing that he always used to say. Everybody, people sometimes have like that thing that they say. Hey, so the Marguleh B'Pumei is such a beautiful, lofty expression. Here, I'm not going to lie, I got excited when I was looking at the daf yesterday. I'm like, maybe it's like a little bit of a break from all of this stuff, right? We're going to see some beautiful, lofty idea. And yet, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, what's the Marguleh B'Pumei de Rabbi Yochanan? Marguleh B'Pumei de Rabbi Yochanan was that Nara Murasa Bas Kohen who commits adultery gets skila. Rabbi Shimon says that it's streifa. And this was the thing that Rabbi Yochanan always said. First of all, again, clearly, don't ask Rabbi Yochanan to say a Dvar Torah at the Shabbos table, right? That's number one, right? But what's the pshat that this is the thing he always said? So just understand. And again, we'll talk about this more. But there's an incredible profundity in this. What's the whole idea of this Bas Kohen? What's the whole idea of the Bas Kohen? The Bas Kohen is that what we do is a reflection on our parents, and what we do is a reflection on our family. And what we do is a reflection on the Ribono Shel Olam himself. Sometimes we think that we exist in a vacuum, so I could do whatever I want because it's just contained to me. It's not true. What I do, how I behave, how I conduct myself is not only, I will say, reflective on my family, by Bas Kohen, it's reflective on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I will say, there's a beautiful Gemara. The Gemara says very quickly, the Torah says, V'yahavtas Hashem Elokecha. You have to love Hashem. So I will say, what's the great problem with the mitzvah V'yahavtas Hashem Elokecha? What's the problem with it? You can't regulate emotions. You can't tell someone how to love you. You can't force someone to love you. That's why Rashi HaKadosh says, Asay devarav me'ava. When you serve Hashem, make it look like you love Him. Make it look like, whether you love Him or not, that's inconsequential, right? Fake it till you make it, right? Go ahead and at least make it look like you love what you're doing, and one day you'll come to love it as well. But the Gemara gives another interpretation. The Gemara says, Shetehei shem shamayim misahiv al yadecha. That ultimately, again, the job of a yid is to make the Ribono Shel Olam beloved in the eyes of other people. That's the goal. To be an ambassador of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To understand each of us are an ambassador of the Ribono Shel Olam. What happens when you're an ambassador? What happens when you're an ambassador? I don't know. But I would assume what happens when you're an ambassador is you represent your host nation. So you show up at an event, right? You are the representative of the United States of America, right? You're everything you do represents the entire identity of the country. Says the Gemara, what does it mean? I'm an ambassador of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what I do and how I live is a representation of the Ribono Shel Olam himself. Perhaps that's why this was Marguleh B'Pumei Rabbi Yochanan. What was Rabbi Yochanan saying? When a Bas Kohen commits adultery, what she's doing is, and we'll get into this more, it's a horrible reflection on her upbringing. It's a horrible reflection on her parents' home. What was the chinuch? What was the chinuch, right? What's happening? What does this represent? Why? Because the daughter of the Kohen, again, is supposed to represent a lofty level. So what she does reflects her parents. What we do, I will say, what we do reflects not only our parents, reflects not only our people, but what we do is a reflection on HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. We are the ambassadors of the Ribono Shel Olam. And to live life with that idea, that what I do, a lot of times if it's just me, I'll do certain things. If I know that I'm representing others, I know that I have to act in a different way. Halachas kama v'kama, when I'm representing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how much more refined my actions have to be. Perhaps that's why it's the Marguleh B'Pumei Rabbi Yochanan. To live life with the recognition that what you do and how you act represents other people, not just your parents, not just your family, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. That is a profound way to live, and that is a profound yesod to keep with you throughout life. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. My Rabbi Shimon. So what's Rabbi Shimon? So the Gemara says, what's Rabbi Shimon? Good. Design Rabbi Shimon Omer, Shnei Klalos Nemru Bas Kohen. There are two rules said about a Bas Kohen. The Bas Kohen v'lo Bas Yisrael. So ultimately, again, we're going to see what are these two klalos. If you look at Rashi says over here, number one, the Bas Kohen v'lo Bas Yisrael. So these two rules were said only by a Bas Kohen, not by a Bas Yisrael. Ema af bebas Kohen v'hotzia kasav nesua mechlal nesua v'arusa mechlal arusa. And I say, let's not over here for today. We'll pick up with this Rabbi Shimon and Mir Hashem tomorrow. Again, and what we'll do tomorrow is, toward the beginning of the show, we'll do the Rambam. So we'll see exactly how we pass in terms of the severity of the Misos Beis Din. Osai Shkoyach.